and take forward our conversation on India-Canada ties. Joining me is Ambassador Mohan Kumar, former senior diplomat. Good evening and welcome, Ambassador Kumar. We just heard a number of CEOs expressing great optimism about India-Canada relations. To begin with, what is your read on the outcome of India-Canada talks today? I mean, would it be fair to call it a reset of ties? One of the CEO calls it India-Canada Partnership 2.0.
Thank you very much for having me. No, I completely agree with that sentiment. I was going to call it a remarkable turnaround in the relationship. After all, you cannot overlook the fact that a couple of years ago, the relationship was mired in deep disagreement, and the relationship itself seemed to be in complete disarray. So to today talk of a substantive roadmap is what the two leaders have agreed. So it's almost incredible that in a matter of 2 to 3 years, and the last 1 year in particular, ever since the assumption of office by Prime Minister Mark Carney, it's been an amazing 1 year for India and Canada, when I think there have been so many visits back and forth, and there have been so many agreements and MOUs signed in this visit. So this is nothing short of spectacular. What the two leaders have done is essentially charted out a pathway for the future up until 2030. And that has not been just confined to the usual areas, which is people-to-people ties, education, and so on, but some new areas. And that is what I will talk about maybe a little later, but For now, I will just say that the relationship for sure has been taken to the next level.
Ambassador Kumar, let's talk about this turnaround. If I were to quote the Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney, he says that more talks and engagement have happened in the past 1 year than they've happened in the past couple of decades. Now, what led to this turnaround? How have the two leaders been able to address the differences, the concerns, especially concerns that India has had related to anti-India extremist elements finding safe haven in Canada?
No, that's a very good question, and I can only put myself in the shoes of the two leaders. From Canada's perspective, I think it's very clear. They have had some turbulence in the relationship with the United States, and Canada, as a middle power, I think, has been saying very frankly and openly that they will have relationship with as many powers in the world as possible. So it's very clear to me that they are de-risking from the United States, as it were. And that seems very obvious to me. Mark Carney's speech at the Davos Economic Forum was noticed by everybody, and he made the point that as a middle power, if you're not on the table, you are on the menu. So Canada's motivation seems very clear. From India's perspective, I would say two things. One thing is that Indian Prime Minister and our government deserves a lot of credit. They grabbed the opportunity when there was a change of leadership in Canada from Justin Trudeau to Mark Carney. And I think there were feelers sent out by Delhi, and the fact that the Prime Minister was invited and he went to the G7 meeting was, I thought, a very good gesture, which was appreciated by the Canadians. So we really took advantage of the change of leadership in Canada. The second thing we have done is to create a separate track between the national security advisors of both countries, which will deal with the issues Canada raised with India. And that is the right way to do it, and not to allow that important fact or matter to affect the entire relationship. That is what the previous government did, and that was unfortunate. What the two governments have now done is to maturely say that, listen, there may be a disagreement, but there is a forum to deal with it. And the best forum would be the two national security advisors, what I call the national security track, which then looks at the issues that can be talked about, and then they can resolve it. But otherwise, to have the entire relationship being held hostage by one disagreement was actually a very foolish thing to do. I'm particularly happy, therefore, that both governments have actually changed tack. And I thought the Indian Prime Minister Modi, was very generous when he said to the Canadian delegation and the Canadian Prime Minister that he gives the full credit to Prime Minister Mark Carney in the turnaround in the relationship.
Right. If you talk about the key takeaways from today's engagements, Canada, we understand, has some of the richest deposits of critical minerals, and the uranium deal in particular for the nuclear reactors, the ecosystem is still taking shape in India. I mean, it could play a key role in sort of the energy security future that India is looking at.
Game changer, absolute game changer, because we need reliable supplies of uranium, and this is a long-term deal. So what the two countries have done is lock in the relationship in terms of the supply of uranium, and I think it's a $1.6 billion. When you talk of dollars, I think there is a bit of confusion between Canadian dollars and US dollars, so it's a 2.6 Canadian dollar deal, if you like. The second thing is that most Indians may not know that quite a bit of the dal that they eat is actually from Canada. It's actually grown in Saskatchewan, and it comes all the way to India. And I'm particularly happy that the two leaders have talked of food security, nutritional security, which is so important for India, that Canada and India will have a Pulse Institute in India, because we really need to get this technology from Canada and try to grow more pulses ourselves. We import a lot of pulses from Canada, and Canada grows it particularly for India. So that is an area of cooperation. I would say energy security, food security, and then, of course, what has really caught my eye is that among the foundational agreements that they have signed, we've also signed an agreement on security and defense issues,
right,
where I think we are talking of security in the Indo-Pacific, maritime domain awareness, and those kind of issues need a certain comfort level between the two countries. I was particularly happy to know that Canada and India have decided to set aside past disagreements and focus on the future. This is a very, very futuristic joint statement that the two countries have agreed on. I would invite your readers to take a look at it. And this statement is substantive. It covers almost all areas. For example, it talks about battery storage and energy self-sufficiency, resilient supply chains, critical minerals, all the kind of things that are futuristic and that actually can set the relationship to a completely new pathway. So in that sense, I describe this visit as a really, really path-breaking visit for India and Canada.
And Ambassador, finally, your quick comments on the people-to-people ties as well, with the emphasis on diversity and democracy. India and Canada should have been natural partners long ago, but now that the ties are warming up, do you see a new area of engagement between the peoples? There's a lot for students as well in this visit of Prime Minister Carney.
Yes, I think what we have to accept is that you may not have the previous levels of the number of students going from India to Canada. That era is, I think, behind us. But what will happen is that there will be a recalibration from both sides, that we also want the right kind of students to go. Legal migration is what we are looking at. And therefore, there may be a recalibration on the part of both sides. But what I do want to say is that people-to-people ties will continue to be the ballast for this relationship. After all, close to 2 million Indian origin people live in Canada, and that's a very, very large number. And therefore, people-to-people ties will continue to be very important. I think it will shift to higher education. It will shift to business and professionals who may now move between the two countries. That is the kind of skill development, talent development that the joint statement talks about.
And Ambassador Mohan Kumar, thank you for joining us on the News Hour.